Welcome to the deep dive. You've shared your sources, and we are going straight to the wall.
Literally.
Literally. Specifically, the wall inside the monastery of Santa Maria del Grazie in Milan. Today, we're taking a high-stakes, time-traveling tour of Leonardo da Vinci's The Last Supper.
An incredible piece.
It really is. I mean, this isn't just a masterpiece painted between 1495 and 1498. It's really an immediate 5-century-long battle between artistic genius and, well, material decay.
That's a perfect way to put it.
It captures that single, pivotal, explosive moment when Jesus announces, "One of you will betray me." The drama that results from that, at this scale, I mean, it's 15 by 29 feet. It's just unparalleled.
And our mission for you, the learner, is to really get that central tension. We're here to extract the nuggets that explain why this monumental work is a hallmark of high Renaissance achievement,
Right.
while also being one of the greatest technical disasters in art history. How can something so profound, so influential, have been so fragile from the moment the brush even touched the wall?
That's the perfect frame. Okay, let's unpack this then. To understand the radical nature of the art, we have to start with the context. Who set the stage for this? Who commissioned it? And what was going on that allowed Da Vinci to paint it this way?
Well, you have to remember, we're squarely in the high Renaissance. We're talking the 15th century.
Okay.
And it was a time that saw this massive rediscovery of classical philosophy, literature, art. It was a real intellectual renaissance, a move away from the more rigid structures of the Middle Ages.
And central to that shift was humanism. We hear that word all the time, but how did that movement directly influence the Last Supper? Because you look at it and it's so clearly not just about biblical doctrine, it's about raw human reaction.
That's a key connection. I mean, that's everything. Humanism gave artists the intellectual freedom to shift the focus from abstract divinity to psychological reality.
Feel less like icons and more like people.
Exactly. Before this, religious figures were often static, idealized, Da Vinci, who was fueled by these humanist ideals and his own intense scientific curiosity, he was able to infuse this sacred moment with incredibly relatable human emotion. He wanted to show the disciples as men.
Frightened, confused, angry men.
Yes, not just symbolic statues.
And that kind of radical experimentation, that takes massive capital. It takes serious patronage. This was all bankrolled by Ludovico Sforza, the Duke of Milan.
Right, and Sforza's court was, well, it was less a monastery, a more crucible for innovation. His patronage and, the overall rise of the powerful merchant class, it completely changed the dynamic for artists.
How so?
It gave figures like Da Vinci the resources and, crucially, the freedom to ignore the traditional rules and just experiment. The Last Supper is basically a proclamation that the artist, the individual, has ideas and techniques worth asserting. It elevates him above just being a craftsman.
Speaking of that freedom, let's pivot to what he actually did with it on the wall, the technique. Because that choice, I mean, it set the stage for all the trouble that followed.
Oh, absolutely.
Here's where it gets really, really compelling. Da Vinci chose a method that was revolutionary for color and detail, but catastrophically flawed for preservation.
He fundamentally rejected the standard method for a wall painting, which was fresco.
Okay, so explain that. What is true fresco?
True fresco requires water-based pigments to be applied really rapidly to wet plaster. As the plaster dries, a chemical reaction bonds the pigment permanently into the wall.
So it's durable.
It's incredibly durable. It lasts for centuries, but it forces the artist to work incredibly fast, a giornata one day at a time, which really limits the amount of detail you can add.
And Da Vinci, the perfectionist, couldn't handle that speed limit.
Exactly. He needed time to think, to blend, to apply layered details. So he made a fatal decision. He used oil and tempera.
Tempera is egg yolk and pigment, right?
Right. He used that on a prepared dry wall. He basically coated the stone wall with a thick layer of gesso and pitch to create a kind of canvas-like surface. This allowed him to get the oil painting effects he wanted, the richness, the luminosity, those really subtle color gradations.
But the wall was in a refectory, which is essentially a dining hall for monks. It's often steamy, it's damp, and critically, that wall was an exterior-facing wall.
A huge problem.
So was this technical choice truly worth the risk, knowing how fragile it would make the work?
For Da Vinci, perhaps yes, because it allowed him to achieve a level of realism no fresco painter could ever touch. But you're right, the physics immediately betrayed the art. The oil and tempera they didn't bond with the dry plaster, they just sat on the surface.
So the humidity.
The humidity from the dining hall, the dampness from the wall itself, it caused the plaster under the paint to swell and contract, and the paint just started peeling.
Mhm.
almost immediately.
And we know this failure was swift. The sources say that the historian Giorgio Vasari, writing only about 50 years later in the mid-1500s, looked at it and described it as nothing more than a muddle of blots.
A muddled blots. It's astonishingly fast for a major work.
It is.
But before that decay set in, his techniques were revolutionary. I mean, he leveraged his intense study of optics to apply two specific methods that really enhanced the realism and the emotional flow.
Let's visualize those for our listener.
Okay, first there's sfumato. Think of it as painting without lines. It's the blending of colors and outlines into these soft transitions, creating that famous smoky, almost misty effect. It softens all the edges and makes the figures look like they're breathing and moving.
The art historian Jacob Burckhardt called it a restless masterpiece, right?
He did. And that restlessness is achieved through this subtle blending.
And then there's chiaroscuro.
Right. That's the masterful use of strong contrast between light and shadow. Da Vinci uses the natural light pouring into the room, but he also creates a dramatic light source within the painting itself, illuminating Christ against that darker windowed background.
So it's not just about depth, it has an emotional purpose.
It totally focuses the emotional and divine significance. The light emphasizes the isolation and divinity of Jesus, making the drama of the betrayal even more stark.
So Da Vinci found a way to paint light and atmosphere, but the structure he painted it on was fighting him every single step of the way.
A constant battle.
But beyond the materials, the real revolution was in how he organized this chaos. Let's move to segment 3, composition, numerology, and that psychological depth.
This is where Da Vinci truly mastered the high Renaissance ideal, imposing order and stability onto high drama.
And he uses the pyramidal composition for that, right?
He does. Jesus is placed at the dead center, forming this stable, unmoving triangle. He's the anchor point.
So everything leads to him.
Everything. Every line in the architecture of the room, every single perspective line, converges precisely at Jesus' right temple. Your eye has no choice but to be drawn right to him.
But if the structure is so balanced, why do the apostles look so chaotic? How does Da Vinci achieve harmony amid all that panic?
He groups the apostles meticulously into 4 sets of 3 figures.
The number 3.
Exactly. That consistent use of the number 3 is entirely symbolic, representing the Trinity and various religious concepts. But within those balanced groups, the emotional reaction is instantaneous and so varied. He captures the psychological depth of men reeling from an accusation.
And we see that through their gestures. Can you describe some of them?
You see everything: shock, denial, interrogation. In the group to Christ's left, you've got Peter, impulsive and aggressive, leaning forward, grasping a knife.
Symbolizing his willingness to fight.
Yes. And right next to him, the youthful John appears to almost swoon, just embodying pure sorrow. But in that same group, you have Judas Iscariot. And he is subtly distinct.
Judas. He's the physical manifestation of the betrayal, almost recoiling from the group.
He is. He's physically isolated, pulling back, casting a shadow. He's the only one not leaning towards or engaging with Christ. And crucially, he's clutching that little money bag.
A visual shorthand for his treachery.
It's his moral isolation right there. He is literally separated by his greed and his conscience, even while sitting at the same table. It makes the divine narrative profoundly relatable.
It's a genius piece of dramatic staging. But speaking of physical separation, we have to mention one of the strangest bits of vandalism the painting ever endured.
You're talking about the door, 1652.
The door.
Yeah. The monks in the refectory, maybe not fully appreciating the aesthetic value over convenience, decided they needed a door to get to the kitchen more easily.
Yeah, they just
cut an archway right through the center of the wall, completely obliterating the feet of Christ and parts of the table.
It's unbelievable. It perfectly illustrates how little respect was shown to the work, even if the artistic genius was recognized. Yet, despite that, despite the abuse and the decay, the painting has always been a source of intense debate. That brings us to segment 4. Controversy and enduring legacy.
Yeah. Initially, its radical departure from tradition, the dramatic gestures, the intense emotional realism, it faced criticism. It was just too dynamic for some viewers who were used to static, formal religious art. And even today, scholars still debate the primary focus.
So is the painting primarily a celebration of the Eucharist, that moment Jesus breaks the bread? Or is it purely about the dramatic revelation of betrayal?
And modern assessments recognize that the genius of it lies in the intertwining of both themes. The act of sharing the meal symbolizes fellowship and sacrifice.
But the announcement of treachery makes that fellowship so fragile.
Exactly. It encompasses both the sacred ritual and the messy complexity of human failure.
The legacy, though, is just undeniable. I mean, it's one of the most recognizable, copied, and parodied artworks in history.
Absolutely. Its composition is instantly recognizable, which makes it a frequent basis for social and cultural commentary. When artists today parody it, whether it's in advertising or movies or political cartoons, they're engaging with those core themes of loyalty, treachery, and fellowship. It proves its relevance. It's a template for high-stakes drama.
And it was lucky to survive it all. We mentioned the decay, but what about human conflict?
It suffered terribly. During the Napoleonic Wars, at the end of the 18th century, French troops used the refectory as a stable.
A stable?
A stable. They reportedly threw bricks at the figures, and there are accounts of soldiers scratching out the eyes of the apostles. Then, in 1943, during World War II, the convent was bombed. The refectory roof was destroyed.
But the painting survived.
A quick sandbagging effort managed to protect the wall itself from the blast. It has survived not just technical failure, but multiple attempts at physical destruction.
That context makes segment 5, the ongoing struggle for preservation, even more astonishing. We need to talk about the sheer effort required to keep this image from turning back into dust.
The struggle truly began almost immediately, and the early restoration efforts were clumsy, often damaging. As early as 1726, restorers tried filling in missing sections with oil paint and even varnished the whole thing.
Which would have just sealed in moisture.
Exactly. Compounded the degradation.
So the major effort, the one that defines its modern appearance, that was the mammoth restoration from 1978 to 1999, led by Pinin Brambilla Barcelon.
An incredibly ambitious and necessary intervention. They had to stabilize the painting in a sealed, climate-controlled environment, filtering out pollution, stabilizing the humidity before they could even think about touching the paint layer.
And they used what sounds like forensic science to understand the original work.
Precisely. They used cutting-edge technology, infrared reflectoscopy, microscopic exams, chemical analysis.
Yeah.
This allowed the team to painstakingly identify and remove centuries of crude overpaintings, everything added in those clumsy early attempts.
But this is where the restoration itself became controversial, right? When they had to decide how to handle the areas where the original Da Vinci paint was just gone.
Yes, this is the debate around what they call normalization. When they removed all the later additions, huge areas of the wall were just left bare, showing the original preparation layers. So the question was, do you leave those white bare spots to show the honest historical damage? Or do you try to make it aesthetically pleasing?
A tough call. What did the team decide?
They chose a middle ground. The unrestorable areas were retouched using these fine vertical strokes of subdued watercolor tones. The goal was to make the image coherent from a distance, to normalize the look, but to ensure that a close examination would always distinguish their modern work from Da Vinci's original pigments.
But critics still argued that making the painting look complete risked losing the historical evidence of its incredible journey of decay.
They did. And it's the ultimate paradox, isn't it? How much do you intervene to save the art before you fundamentally change the history of the object itself?
And that struggle is still going on every single day. The monastery is now a technological marvel dedicated to keeping that environment constant.
You can't just wander in and look at it anymore.
Right, that's part of the preservation.
Access is strictly regulated, only small groups, by appointment. They have these sophisticated filtering systems and automatic doors to minimize pollutants and continuous environmental monitoring. It's an art object that requires constant, modern, highly expensive human intervention just to survive a technique that was doomed 500 years ago.
That brings us right back to where we started. We've seen the genius composition, the sfumato, the psychological depth, especially focusing on Judas's betrayal and this constant battle for its survival.
And if you connect this to the bigger picture, it asks a really powerful, paradoxical question. The Last Supper was created during the High Renaissance, an era that celebrated man's power, that humanist ideal to achieve greatness and control nature.
Right.
Yet Da Vinci's greatest narrative triumph, the powerful exploration of loyalty and human failure, was built using a technique that immediately betrayed its own structural integrity.
So the work's meaning is eternal, a profound study of faith and treachery. But its physical form is perpetually defined by decay.
And the absolute necessity of human intervention. It's a reminder that even the greatest acts of genius are tethered to the ephemeral nature of material creation. It invites you to explore that connection between faith, betrayal, and the sheer complexity of preserving something that was meant to last forever, but was almost designed to fail instantly.
Food for thought. Thank you for joining us for the deep dive. We'll see you next time.